This is a Vedanta Series question and answers. So we'll begin with our usual prayer. By now you probably know it, so you can join in with me if you like. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanao Bhunuktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil or argue with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So, being question and answer, I mute my microphone while you formulate questions that you have. And I have one question here already. To define the term God intoxication, please. Okay. God intoxication is one question that is there in the chat, but I'll mute my microphone in case there are any more questions.
Swami, please, how can we elevate the mind from the lazy mind, from the dull mind, and then to sustain that? Thank you.
Okay, so the two questions are really correlated in a way. And when we talk about the mind, it's necessary to think of, so what is the mechanism of a mind? Because the mind is something that we can observe, and if we observe it in a lazy condition or an elevated condition, then it's because there's something that is not the mind that is observing it. Now, Vedanta has this great advantage. What the Vedanta says is, and this is the advantage it has over the geography of the mind as elucidated by those specialists in it, and that is found in the Sankhya philosophy, and the control of it is found in the yoga philosophy, practical philosophy. But still, Vedanta explains many things. And so Vedanta would say, yes, okay, but you must have noticed there is some observing element of the mind. Somebody is able to stand back and say, oh, the mind is in this condition or that condition. And so when we talk about this, some useful texts are there in relation to this. One of the most useful texts is the Drishya Viveka. And when I was in Switzerland at the conference there, the whole subject was on Viveka. And many different definitions came out from the various speakers. But I thought it was appropriate to bring out various texts. Drishya Viveka, Viveka Shulamani of Shankaracharya, and the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, along with the Yoga Sutras. We can understand the mind as not just one thing. So according to the Sankhyas and the Yogis, the mind is mind stuff. We can imagine it like a wave, or like an ocean, and different waves come up. And so in the question, we see the mind, that is this mind stuff, has erupted into waves that are slightly unenthusiastic, or dull, or lazy. Now we have to also understand that, according to the yogis, mind and matter are the same thing. Well, just different varieties of the same thing. So there is a non-dualism with regards to matter. And in modern science, we have this replacement of this term non-dualism with monism. Most physicists are monists. That is, they bring everything back, strip everything back as much as possible to fundamental elements. So we have an observer watching the mind in a certain condition, and the condition that we normally find the mind in comes up from an unconscious area. It's more useful probably to say it's a habit level. So there's a habit that comes up, And it often comes up as a response to various conditions. For example, stress. So a stressful situation arises. There are some ways of dealing with it. We can withdraw into a morbid condition or torpid condition. And a great example of that is sleep. Go to sleep. The same thing, of course, if you're under an operation, you have general anesthetic. All right, don't worry about the pain. There's no connection with the pain. If the mind is not connected with the body, and we can give you an anesthesia, then you won't feel any pain. You may feel it afterwards when the consciousness connects again with the physical body. But for that time being, we can cut you open, we can do what you like, you won't feel any pain because that area of the mind has disconnected. And so that's one way of dealing with the world in front of us. Another way of dealing with the world in front of us is to charge into it like a bull in a china shop, and without any careful thought. And another way of dealing with it is to revalue a circumstance. So how do we deal with the lazy mind? We have to be in a constant state of revaluing, and this revaluing process is called viveka. That's the value of bringing the subject up in relation to any condition of the mind. We have to learn the capacity of discerning in such a convincing way that the mind is persuaded. And so when you talk about the principle of non-dualism, that's all very well. It's a toolbox we can use, which says, wait, number one, there's an observer. There's an observer of a mind in a certain condition. Not only is it observing it, with the capacity to change it. And so we have to understand that the geography of everything, be it mind, be it body, be it the universe, be it a galaxy, is that it is all made from three things. And these three evolutionary forces that come out with some substantial thing with it, some material thing with it, is what everything is made of, including the mind. And when the mind is in a lazy condition, it means that element that we call tamas is operating. That's good, because noticing it is the first start. Ignoring it or not noticing it is not a good thing. When your car is struggling up a hill because it is in third or fourth gear, well, then you notice, oh, wait, okay. And you have the opportunity, because you're independent of the gear, to take the gear and shift it up to the next level, and shift it up to the next level. But where does the tendency toward laziness of the mind come from? It comes from the lack of conviction, really, that there is something much more, that the operating principle is also the ultimate principle. It is the ultimate goal, because that observing principle has all the characteristics of the absolute. It is not restricted. It is full. It is free. It is an observing element. It is a witnessing element. It is an enjoying element. And it is a knowing element, and it is a thinking element. And knowing this, we have the capacity to change. How can we do it? We have to condition the mind. In other words, we have to create counter habits to our reactive habits. And if one reactive habit is to go to sleep and to suspend all of our engagement in the external world, then we have to introduce as many tools as we possibly can. And so we have these various resources at our disposal. Scripture is at our disposal. We should read scripture. But then you ask, but if I am lazy enough, if I cannot have the enthusiasm to do that, then what? Well, then you have to, go to a teacher. But if you can't be bothered to do that, then what? Then you have to look at your own condition and make a decision. Supposing that doesn't happen, then what? Then you have to suffer pain. And nature has a way of prodding you through painful circumstances to revalue everything. So in any case, in every case, it's entirely up to you. Whatever course of action you take, there are resources at your disposal. It's like, oh, I run out of food. I should go to the supermarket, but I cannot be bothered. Well, all right, you can either decide my hunger pangs are such that I need to do something that will motivate you, or you send for, these days you can send for food to your place. Maybe that's a way out, but they may deliver the wrong things to you. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So we have to start off with an element of resolve and keep the resolve going. And we have the resources of prayer. We have the resources of a mantra. We have the resources of re-educating the mind on the habit level. And this means practice. What we call yoga means practice. Repetition of the same principles, because we suffer principally from forgetfulness. And therefore, anything that reminds us of our original state and of our original goal and of our original purpose, and the things that, practically speaking, will avoid pain for us, has to be engaged. First port of call, understand what is the nature of the mind, something like a car with 3 gears. When we find tamas, darkness, depression, or laziness operating there, then we shift it up to the next gear, activity. Both of these things will result ultimately in pain because they are egoistic, they are egocentric. Still, operating with rajas is better than not doing anything. Doing something is better than not doing something. And the Bhagavad Gita tells us, Krishna says, don't disturb those people. Don't disturb those people who are actively engaged in the world, and don't catch on to these principles. And we may add, what is the reason behind it? Because nature itself is in an evolutionary state. Something is inside you which is unfolding and willing to develop, because we all have an aspiration for happiness and we all have an aspiration for perfection. It's only that we have to look for it in the right place and remind ourselves of the fundamental principles. There are classes sometimes that we give or that somebody else gives, and you'll find that maybe children come and they're taught principles of religion. Something like every religion has a version of Sunday school. And if children take their shoes off, for example, and enter into it, never mind about what is being taught. You should bring the children back to the shoes and say, wait, put all these shoes in order, please. Make sure that you put everything in order. Fundamental discipline, in other words. Make your bed. Make sure your room is tidy. Make sure your place is clean. Make sure that you are able to view things that you never noticed before about yourself, about your body, about your environment, and about generally what you see, what you observe. And don't think that the mind is divorced in any way from the body. So if the mind says, oh, let me just make an exception to the rule as a kind of relief from stress, maybe it's eating, maybe it's involved in some kind of drinking or previous behavior that you felt was a relief, but it's not a permanent solution, never mind. And you do that. And then every exception ultimately becomes the rule. And then you've lost the discipline. So we always have to be watchful at the smallest lapse. And when we catch ourselves in that lapse, make the correction in the same way that you drive a car. When you drive a car and the car starts going off towards the ditch, you make a correction until ultimately you don't think about it. It's automatic. So the habit level has to be re-educated in such a way that automatically it makes the correction. And part of that is not blaming. Part of that is not feeling guilty. Part of that is not feeling angry. Part of that is not having self-recriminations, because we live in a time framework where the next second has to be used. Just like, oh, the car is veering off to the one side, so let me blame myself. And instead of making the correction, make the correction now. And then resolve. Whenever the car goes in the one way, we take it in the other direction. Whenever we notice that the car is struggling, the car's engine is struggling because the gear is wrong, then we notice it and we shift the gear up. This is the game, this is the art of life and of living, the game of life and how to play it. Noticing where we need to make the adjustments without any, in a sporting way, without self-recriminations. Oh, come on, okay, it's in this condition, let me shift it up. I'm not the mind. The mind is my instrument, antakarana, my internal instrument. And I can shift the gears as I like to the highest level. Now, most of us are devotees. That means the easiest, most natural way of doing this is love of God. And so love of God is reflected in human love. If it wasn't for the fact that we have human love and emotions, we would not think about a loving God, or the fact that God is lovable, or whatever we have as a substitute word or concept for God. Some entity that is freely giving me a flow of thought current for use without asking for an account. Pumping my heart freely without asking for thanks. Digesting my food freely without criticizing what I fed into it and what was difficult. Such a loving entity is the same entity that spins all the galaxies. Such an entity is the same entity that produces the expansion of space, that produces the capacity to breathe, that makes an arrangement, nice, balanced, regular arrangement where a tree takes in, all the elements that it requires and carbon dioxide and gives us back oxygen and gives us the opportunity to appear before us in selected colors and forms that is suitable for the eyes to see and for the hands to touch. But the chances are we ignore a tree. The chances are when we're walking in a forest, we're talking and engaged in other things. Maybe self-pity in some cases, maybe external affairs in other cases. But in any event, we're distracted from an opportunity for elevating the spirit. And when the thankfulness increases, when the feeling of gratitude increases, when love becomes more connected to the reality of love itself, then at that point, we have ultimately a God intoxication. Like drinking some ambrosia, we take a sip, it's pleasant. And then we take a little bit more, it's more pleasant. Alcoholism is based on this, isn't it? That we think that there is something that we can do that will alleviate our suffering for the moment. And then we get more used to it. Eventually we become dependent on it. And so the devotee has this idea of dependency. But you see, it's a mutual dependency. The beloved, that is my God, I express myself in such a way that I feel that I'm dependent on my God, and my God is dependent on me. Let's substitute the words. My beloved is dependent on me, and I am dependent on my beloved. And the beautiful poetic language that comes out from the great Sufi saint Ibn Arabi, for example, that uses these terms, where the lover and the beloved ultimately become one. So this intoxication occurs, and we can see it in the lives of mystics and saints. universally, regardless of religion. We see it in Ramakrishna's life. His God intoxication, a God intoxicated person. And what are the physical symptoms? Reeling like a drunkard. Whenever Ramakrishna saw a drunkard, he never criticized him. He went, took his arm and danced with him. Imagine. Because it reminded him of this God intoxication. And in human relations, we see you fall in love. Of course, there's a reason why you say falling. There's a consequence to it. So you fall in love. Then it means you have a magnificent obsession. You think about the person. Your heart is engaged in the person. 24 hours of the day, you're remembering the person. Constant remembrance is there. And young love is a great example of this. Gilbert and Sullivan, when they make an operetta, and I can't remember the exact words, but lady, lady, misery me, lackaday thee. It means he doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, he's in a daze, you see. Because this God intoxication and human love intoxication is chemical. Chemicals arise in the brain, see? And we know these chemicals, and nowadays we can measure these chemicals. And that makes the whole body feel good. Serotonin and all the rest of it come out. These love chemicals come out. It's exactly the same in God intoxication, with this exception. Human love comes and goes, and the chemical reactions come and go. But since the beloved is always there, is always permanent, is never defective, never lets you down, is always a flow of grace and love. We love that beloved because that beloved is lovable, is always giving, doesn't have any of the human flaws that upset our human take on love, that becomes primarily selfish. I love you because of my own self-gratification, because I want to feel loved. And the minute you have an argument, or the minute that you no longer love, then it's gone, you see. So how did you fall in love with this person? Oh, their eyes. Oh, I see, you fell in love with chemicals. I have to advise you that the eyes will become dull and no longer beautiful after 20, 30, 40 years. Oh, I love the physical beauty of that person. Yes, okay. But after 10 years, a potbelly grows. What became of your love? So the attractive nature on the physical level and even on the personality level has to deepen in order to access the fundamental source of the human being. And that is what we call God, the innermost source of your own being that is to be found everywhere. And so in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that significant statement is there in the second verse already, in the 13th chapter. Know me, says Krishna, that is that fundamental God, to be the knower in all the fields. So there's an idea of separateness. There's a knower and there's a field in personal experience. And now you bring in, who is this knower? It is the divine knower that we in religion we call God. Know me, to be the knower in all the fields. So that once we discover that beautiful divine entity in ourselves, we can recognize it everywhere. And all the Upanishads are replete with it. See the self in all beings in the self is a constant theme. Now, when we see that, we have revalued something. We've revalued the place where we live. We've revalued the human body. We've revalued food. We've revalued relationships with people. We've revalued people themselves. We look at them differently. Instead of seeing a psychophysical being, we see God. There's no other way of saying it. Our most beloved we see. Whatever eyes we see are that divine eyes shining everywhere. We see that divine face, whatever face we alight on is the Lord's face. We see that everywhere. And then you see, is this not an intoxicated state where we see this beloved everywhere? Human love doesn't see that. Human love only sees the individual. But divine love sees this everywhere, so that we are completely in a state of internal rapture. Why not? And that has a telling effect on everything. What becomes then of your laziness, the lazy mind? It's infused with enthusiastic love. It's infused with joy. Only because we made that connection and we deepened it, and in deepening it, we deepened our understanding. Because there's a difference between knowledge and understanding. We have to know the principles of this, yes. But the emotions have to catch up to it. So one of the first things in my presentation, for example, at the conference, excuse me for bringing this up, but it's fresh in my mind because it was an amazing conference, because the whole subject was on this viveka. And so my first presentation, I said, you see, and I gave the example that I always give to you as well-known example. You're probably tired of that example, where I tell people about arranging a plank. So just for repetition's sake, I'll tell it again. And if I've told it before, I'm sorry, but I tend to repeat all these things. So you see, if I arrange a plank and put it on a lawn, let's say a plank which is about 1 meter, let's extend it. Let's say it's even 2 meters, 2 meters broad. Let's say it's 10 meters long, 10, 15 meters long. And I ask you, please walk along the plank. You'll say, of course, I'll do it. It's there, it's steady, it's on the lawn. Not only will I walk on it, I can hop on it. I can ride a bicycle on it. I can hop on one leg, no problem. Why do you ask? Because this same plank, I'm going to put over a huge chasm, 200 feet deep, let's say. And I'm confusing feet and meters, never mind about that. I sometimes think in feet, sometimes think in meters. And I say, let me put a bag of money on the one side, 1 million euros there. All you have to do is, I'll fix this plank over a chasm. I'll fix it with bolts so that even an elephant can walk across it. It can't be disturbed. And your challenge is to walk along that same plank, the same plank that you walked on, you hopped on, you rode a bicycle on, only under one condition. 2 weeks in advance, you're entitled to get the 1 million euros on the other side. 2 weeks in advance, every night I'll show you a film. And the film will contain actors who tried it, wobbled, and fell to their death. And you look down and you see squashed bodies on the bottom of the valley floor. Chances are you won't attempt it. Because in a context between emotion and intellect, emotion will always win. And it's the same as saying in a contest between knowledge, just knowing the principles, and the emotions, the willing aspect of you, the mobilizing aspect of you. Well, emotions, feelings, they will always win. And when I give the example, I'm careful to point out, this is a key to advertising. Advertising, use this. If they say, please buy this cream and give you the chemical composition and tell you how it's made, chances are, when you understand the chemical composition, you won't want to put it on your face anyway. But in the advert, they don't mention it. They simply say, this will take 5 years off your life. If when you put it on your face, you look like a film star and all your wrinkles would disappear. Oh, okay, then we'll purchase it. So the emotions are what has to rally around in any circumstance. If we want to control the mind properly, we have to get the emotional mind caught up to the principles and engage in the enthusiasm of it. And the more we do it, and the more we engage in not just worship, but putting heart and soul into a relationship with something that is sustaining your body, something that is pumping your heart. And people who are out of touch with the concept of, let's say, God, and they say, I don't know what this is, I'm estranged from it. In my childhood, I had some idea, but now I'm an adult. I no longer have those ideas. All right. So can you please feel your pulse, locate your pulse? Oh, yes, okay. When I do this, some people can't feel the pulse. I have to indicate. Of course, if you can't feel your pulse, we have to worry a little bit. Yes, okay, I feel my pulse. Okay. So what is the cause of this pulse? And if they answer correctly, they'll say the heart, the heartbeat. Okay. Now, what is pumping the heart? What is infused in the heart? We can call it life that enables the heart to pump. Now contemplate this, please. That same principle is digesting your food, renewing your cells, making this ADP, ATP exchange with nutrients. Food gets put in here and comes out as energy there. What is this converting thing? And that loving entity does it second after second, minute after minute, constantly does it. You couldn't get a better lover than this. That's called God. Surely once or twice we should say thanks. We should register it. Now, if that thankfulness increases, and then you realize, because there's a revelation coming, because every one of these movements, which are not arranged to support your egocentric position, your selfish position, any thought, any words, any actions that contain a level of purity. What do we mean by purity? Disassociation from my embodied condition, or disassociation from my passport identity. I am so and so. This is my identity. This is my body. This is my personality. These are my parents. This is my occupation. All of these are objective, but the real subject is different. And anything that is viewed directly or indirectly from that subjective point of view, that is what we call purity. And this purity of mind has to be engaged more and more in such a way we don't have to attend to things such as laziness. We don't have to attend to any evaluated aberrations in our personality or supposed defects. We simply have to drink the ambrosia of divine grace. That's all we have to do. And the rest will take care of itself. We have to saturate the mind with the divine grace, with the presence of the chosen ideal representing the absolute. Swami Vivekananda's definition, what is God? So he says the personal God. That means, what do you call Ishvara? What is that? Now, interesting, he gives two things in different places. But you say it is the nearest representation to the human mind of the absolute. It is the nearest that we can get, because that nearness is from divine revelation that gives us just a small cloth of separation. It's like a lamp that contains many different layers. Let's say a normal light will have one lampshade. Imagine 5 of them. 5 lampshades are there, what we call koshas. 5 sheaths are there, physical sheath, then the energetic sheath, and then the mental sheath, and then the intellect sheath, and then the one made from bliss. This is the Taittiriya Upanishad's explanation. It's a way of evaluating a human person to get to the core. Imagine now inside is a light, the original lamp, and so many layers. The last layer would be a layer where nearness is not quite oneness. And on the one side, we see how the light is reflected through the other lampshades, and how each one, when we remove it mentally, when we remove our attachment to each one, then the light becomes brighter, becomes clearer. The truth becomes more obvious to us. And so what is this purification? It is purification of the body, purification of our energy, purification of the mind, purification of the intellect. And finally, the intellect, then, the mind itself becomes a lamp that reveals our own true nature. by itself. The nature doesn't have to do anything. The Lord of the universe, described as Atman, or the Lord within, doesn't have to do anything. It's shining, all things shine. It simply has to shine. And its light, its luminosity, is reflected in every single one of their layers. And that's what we call life. A person has a life, a liveliness in their eyes. Where does it come from? It's not self-produced. It's a reflection of that inner light which is there. Did we notice it, or did we argue with it? So we have to revalue our thinking constantly. And in devotional life, get to that point where the whole mind is saturated in devotional language with the beloved's presence. And so this is called God intoxication, akin to substance intoxication. And we can see how Ramakrishna reeled. We can see how he was so engrossed, so saturated in the divine presence, in yogic language called Vishuddha Chakra, at that point, that place of eternal joy and bliss, enjoying the world in its divine context, and at the same time enjoying the source. He was connected with both and could easily shift from the absolute to the relative very, very easily, and taught us that these are two sides of the same coin. That means we have the opportunity to enjoy every single facet of life, knowing that God's face is everywhere. God's arms and heads and hands and legs are everywhere present. Should that not give us joy? Should we complain about how they're configured and their behavior and so on? There's a tendency to do that, only because our ignorance brings us back. Oh, there's an individual, which means I'm an individual looking. And when I notice that mistake, then I have the opportunity to revalue everything and say, oh Lord, you are there. You are there looking like this, looking like that, dressed up in disguise everywhere. But I know the secret, because with a wink and a nudge, looking at you, I've caught you out. You are there. You are there disguised as a woman, disguised as a man, a boy. Tolstoy gives a beautiful story in this, Leo Tolstoy. He knew this Vedanta very well. He gives a beautiful story about how he's looking a person. He was a cobbler, actually, working in a basement, and lost his faith through tragedy. Often we do that. Even temporarily, we can have this lapse. And then he said, well, if God can show me himself, I'll believe. Made a challenge like that. And after so many adventures and so on, you have to read the story in detail. He comes to the conclusion, you said you would visit me. I never saw you. You never came to me. Did you not see that you were the woman at the door that you helped? Did you not see that you were this, that, the boy crying and so on? All these instances, did you not see that was me? So we have to look at things in a fresh way and learn to look at things in a fresh way. It's a progressive process. It's a progressive process. Right now, our vision is limited, but the internal vision opens and shifts, and it does with practice, and it's nothing to do with us. Our initial opening is simply allowing divine grace to flow in. It's the divine grace that's doing it. We just have to make openings, that's all. And the more openings we make, and the more sustained we make those openings, the more this divine grace flows through everything and fills our whole awareness with divine glory and grace. We should surely even experimentally try it. So this is the formula. So we're all very fortunate because we have access to scripture, we have access to teacher, we have access to the resources around us, food, clothing, shelter. We have all these advantages we have. There are many people in the world that don't fully have these advantages. There's something here in the text. I'll just read it. Okay, we all have likes and dislikes, it says, when we dislike something, we naturally find fault and criticize. I never feel good after sharing my negative views on something, my dislikes, despite it being how I truly feel about a particular subject. Should we aim to only like things? And if so, won't we lose, I guess, our personality and our ability for critical thinking? Well, now you see, that's an interesting question. You see, if we are completely truthful and honest and appraise ourselves, then we would highlight our good qualities as well as our negative qualities, both. But you see, many cultures, many cultural upbringings will say it's not good to say something good about yourself. And naturally, we may tend to highlight the things that we like and avoid the things that we dislike. But you see, we have to have an honest appraisal. Supposing we use the same system when we're dealing with a motor car and there's a knock from the engine, and we say we don't like the knock, but we won't attend to it. We have to attend to it. So we have to make these adjustments in our personality. Now, Vedanta has a different technique, because Vedanta says, okay, that's all very fine, but you've forgotten that behind you, in you, underneath you, supporting you is a vast ocean. And when we withdraw to that, then all this question of likes and dislikes goes away. You might say, is that avoiding the issue? Of course. Is that burying your head in the sand? No. It's creating a stability, which then when you open your eyes and come back to the relative world, makes a scope for reevaluation of everything. So addressing the things that you don't like in your own personality is just a question of self-assessment, giving you the opportunity to adjust. But here's the final adjustment. The final adjustment is not to identify yourself with it. Because what we're saying is, when we say me, we're really saying the mind, or we're saying the personality, that means the mask, or the body. And we have to get used to the idea, none of these are mine or me. We are conditioned to think like this, we're conditioned to possess this, but it is no more valid than saying, I am the car, I am the engine, I am the hubcap, I am the wheel, I am the gear stick. I am none of these. If I think I'm any of these, I have no possibility to control the car or attend to it or accept the knock and correct it. You're like going along in the car, the oil light comes on, and your analysis is, oh, I see the oil light must be defective. I must replace the light. No, you'll wind up with a seized engine. You have to replace the oil. So we have to look at these characteristics, face them honestly. We can do it privately, of course. We don't have to tell anybody about it, but resolve. All right, we can make the adjustment because I'm not the instrument. These are instrumentals. Why are these instruments there for me? To give me trouble? No. These instruments are there so that I can reveal my true nature, what is internal to me. That's why they're there. It's very useful. Even if you live a good life and get born and take your reward as a deity or a being in another dimension, the Vedanta philosophy tells us you still have to come back to complete your road to freedom as a human being, because it's only the human being that has the equipment. And the equipment is tied up with causality, cause and effect. This is the principle of karma. Every effect has a cause. And the principal cause in terms of human nature is thought. Anything that goes on in the mental field. will be translated, will be your ordering mechanism to the universe to deliver something that is a scene in front of you. And so the art of assessing, where am I now? What condition is the mind in at any given circumstance? And not waiting for next year. Supposing you're in a team and you're playing football or any other sport, and a coach comes along to you and says, you see, you're good at passing, not so good at heading. So next year we'll correct the heading. No, do it now. I have a match next Tuesday. Let's do it now. Practice now. Don't postpone it. Even in companies, you see, I'll give you an annual review. No, please make the correction now. You can't wait for next year. You wouldn't do that in a sports team. You'd make the correction now, as early as possible, lest it become a habit, an unfortunate habit. Let me reread the question to make sure that I was close.
I'll just come in there because I thank you very much. I guess the only other further clarification would be, like, in a social environment, almost, it's like, you know, it's how so many of us bond is our opinions and our likes and our dislikes, and what did you think of this? And like, I won't give my opinion, but the Queen died, and even that, you know, I was out and it was like so many conversations, and it became quite, interesting, we'll say. But is it about, like you said, not attaching, like observing the mind and then choosing whether we want to say that out loud? Maybe we don't have to always express our dislikes, because that's what I was saying. It's like, well, I might feel that, or it could be a musician, or what you think of her. And then you've got loads of answers flooding the mind. And if they're negative, you know what I mean, over time, it doesn't feel good in the system. And I always remember Holy Mother saying, you know, don't try not to find fault in others.
Yes.
It's just trying to,
Yeah. So the basis for any evaluation is whatever action I take, whatever thought I take, is it elevating the mind to a higher state? In other words, is it a movement towards moksha, freedom? Freedom is our goal. And you may use alternative terms, supreme happiness, perfection. Any of these terms are equivalent terms. And so our judgment in terms of our actions and our thoughts are, is it taking me toward a so-called progression, or more accurately toward a revelation? Or is it putting another obstacle there? And so each person has to evaluate for themselves in terms of their reactions.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
Well, we have 10 minutes to go. I hope I answered some questions.
Swami?
Yes.
Could I ask you, I haven't really got it formulated clearly, but something about the sort of co-presence of the Absolute as Satchitananda, and then the personal God, you know, the Ishtadevata, which is taken from history, you know, in the sense that the avatars lived in time. They were within the temporal, spatial, causal framework, and that we can relate to them because we're in that framework. The infinite has been modulated into that framework, and we feel ourselves within that framework. Then, in order to establish relationship with our Ishtadevata, which can be different for different people, you know, or we're relate. Is that a process of purification? It's the conjunctive aspect of it, the fact that there's both the Absolute and the you know, the Ishtadevata, you know, it co-present in reality at the same time. And yet the Ishtadevata, because they were in a body and that they were subject to time, and they were, you know, they fade out of history in a way, you know, they fade out of physical reality anyway, you know, because then they're no longer embodied. So, you know, is that process of when your devotion to Inishta is purifying the mind. I can see that, but it's still personal, and this action may not be good enough, you know.
Yes, you see, what we call Vedanta provides us with a toolbox. The ultimate tool that we have is Advaita, non-dualism. That's our ultimate tool. It's an all-purpose, multi-purpose tool. It's like in plumbing, you can have various tools, but there is something in Zimbabwe, we used to call it Bobby John spanner. I don't know what it's called. It's a
universal
kind of an adjustable wrench, you know? Yeah. And so an adjustable wrench has a great advantage. You can reduce it to any size you want, an adjustable spanner, if you will, and then you can tighten any bolt. The problem is that it may round the bolt as well, so you have to use it carefully. So the ultimate multi-purpose tool is if we're really stuck, we can bring this out. So it's like when your car breaks down, you don't say, okay, let me use all the tools. No, you bring out the most suitable tool available for the problem. So we have this wide range of tools. Now, the most important thing is that we are able to rally the emotions around, and this is why Bhakti Yoga is so useful. And an intrinsic part of that is to relate to a real, divinely expressed, serial chosen ideal, deliberately formulated for you, that is real. And when we say real, Vedanta philosophy says, well, it's all in the relative world and so on. Even every aspect of nature, including the cosmic mind, disappears on the appearance of the non-dual reality. Yes, this is true, but it doesn't help us. It helps us if we understand it in principle, but it doesn't help us resolve problems in practical life, namely mobilizing the feelings. So to be in touch with our feelings and understand that there is a beloved available to us here and now. See Joel Goldsmith's oft-quoted definition of meditation, a song of gratitude that God is now, is love. And right now, as you're speaking, that can be felt. So when that happens, what does it do? Yes, it saturates the mind with pure love. And of all the qualities that we have to cultivate, love is the highest quality. But you may ask some people, what is love? And they're out of touch with it. They can't relate to it. So, because love is an indefinable thing, you can't have a pocket of love and take it home for lunch. So, okay, what is this love? Don't worry about defining it, but can you feel it? And when you feel it, what it means is it opens the heart. In opening the heart, divine grace flows in. And this is related to another question in there, which says, you said that it's the grace does everything, but what about choices and decisions? Well, we have this capacity to choose one of two different avenues. What Katha Upanishad and Bhagavad call the preferable and the pleasurable paths. Shreyas and Nishreyas, we have the capacity to choose our direction. And pleasure means what will the choice be that will benefit us personally, physically, and from the point of view of mentally and all the things, in other words, egocentrically. What will that path choose? In other words, relating to the world in such a way that it will result in pain for us ultimately, versus something which is preferable that initially may look uncomfortable, but actually turns out to be blissful. So which should we choose? Yes, we have the capacity to do this. But once we choose any path we like, once we choose the either the preferable or the pleasurable, it's then out of our control. because it's then gone into the universal supermarket that arranges what we want. Either way, it's divine grace. When we choose the inner path, when we choose the preferable path, when we choose the sattvic path, the path of purity, the path of love, the path of selflessness, immediately it acts as an opening mechanism for divine grace to flow through.
Is that because, like, that say love in a romantic relationship, it's a one-to-one relation, but then as love grows, it gets less personal because it expands outwards. It's like the circle is expanding out.
Well, you
to include more and more. It's more and more inclusive.
Yes.
That's what sort of like a holy love would be. A holy love would be holistic, literally holistic.
Well, when we talk about human love, there's a range. From genetic love, you see, one-on-one is, yes, very often is one-on-one, and the only one involved is you.
Yeah, well, that can be just like pleasure seeking, because it can be just it can be looking for physical sensation.
Yes, and every animal has that kind of genetic love. So what is unique about the human? What is unique about the human is that they can transcend survival issues. They can transcend basic issues of food pleasure and physical pleasure, and even the more sophisticated cultural pleasure. So pleasure has these various levels: physical pleasure, then there is emotional pleasure, there is cultural pleasure, there is pleasure in science, there's pleasure in working out difficulties and problems, using creativity, ingenuity. All of that is levels of pleasure. The Taittiriya Upanishad gives us levels of bliss. And the level of bliss, which is that bliss derived from your own self, that is equivalent to any other kind of happiness and bliss and transcends it ultimately. So we learn as we grow and develop that it is that we get more satisfied when we become more generous and we become more selfless. And the more that grows and develops, the more our love expands, so that human nature, we know, has the capacity for absolute selfless love, And if you take, for example, all the tributes that are going on that have been mentioned about the Queen, excuse me, then we'll see that photograph of her last, maybe her last official act was within a very short time of her physical death. In other words, it moves people's hearts to see that somebody can be dedicated in this way, thinking of other people in this way. And it is the basis for genuine charity. It is the basis for genuine philanthropic works. It is the basis for the intentions of the good of humanity. It is behind movements that want, some movements anyway, that want to attend and adjust environmental issues, or rescue refugees, or wipe an orphan's tears. This has nothing to do with survival. It has nothing to do with biological conditioning. This is something different. And it is this difference that we have in man. And so when that expands more, it's equivalent to seeing this divine element in the orphan, in the refugee, in the environment, in all of these circumstances, and responding accordingly. This response is what we call true intimate worship.
That's like, because we have the possibility of purification.
Yes.
Of self-purification.
Yes. But you see, the beauty about having an Ishtadevata and all that is purification happens by itself. We don't have to go and polish things, because we're inviting this divine into us and allowing ourselves to be saturated with something that is more noble, something that is higher, something that is perfect and full and free.
That's why Ramakrishna told his name Ghosh, I just forget his first name, I'm not good with names. You know, the theater, you know who I'm talking about?
Girish Chandra Ghosh.
Ghosh, yeah. That he said to him, no, drink more. You know,
Well,
he was a drink.
no,
Didn't he say something like,
well, no,
or
he
have I
didn't
got
say,
the
no,
story wrong?
He didn't say drink more. He didn't move him toward alcoholism. No, no, but he, you see, he said you have to revalue everything. This is a tantric system that says, okay, if you feel this is difficult, try to see it in a different way. You see, so supposing you are an alcoholic or you have a problem with drink, all right, repression is not the good answer. No psychologist, no counselor will ever tell you repress something. They'll always want to say, take this energy and see if you can steer it in a different way. So when you have a drink, and this was an advice to somebody else really, then offer it to the Divine Mother of the universe. Make it a sacred thing. And the effect of that was the person couldn't overdrink because it was now a sacred thing, such as happens in a puja. It has become a divine offering. As soon as we insert divinity in our activities, then the whole thing changes. As soon as we say at the workplace, I'm not doing a drudgery, this is equivalent to worship, is equivalent to going into a church and partaking in Mass, or is equivalent to going to a Hindu temple and partaking in puja, or it's equivalent to going on a pilgrimage, or it's equivalent to a walk in the mountains, or it's equivalent to sitting in a forest by a river. Work is evaluated in this way, it becomes sacred, it becomes divine, and has the effect of saturating the mind with purity. Because most of our activity, most of our time spent every day is spent in earning a living. That's the fact of it in modern life. And so we can't say, well, there's a separation. There's spiritual life on the one side, and then there's my daily different life and concerns on the other. No, because there is one purpose to be fulfilled. And what we call work and activity, physical, mental, or otherwise, and the resources are all expressions and manifestations of the divine.
That's all, like in Brother Lawrence.
It's all God. What we see as the world is seemingly fragmented God. And as soon as we register this, an internal elevation of spirit takes place, and this revaluation of everything becomes something like an internal surge of joy within. And it is equivalent to saying, God's grace, divine grace, is surging through me, and I feel it up to the tips of my fingers, and I feel it and acknowledge it everywhere.
Thank you, Swami.
Okay, so okay, we have to leave it there. So it's 11:35. We've overrun by 5 minutes, but that's okay. So I hope I've managed to deal with, at least partially anyway, with issues.
Thank you, Swami. Yes, thank you, Swami. Guru Mahagat.
All right, Guru Mahagat.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Okay, thank you. All right, good.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup. Yes, thank you. Bonne journée and Guru Mahagat and so on. Yes. Have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Om Shanti Shanti.